Yo, 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 it's Rachel La Loca, host of Latinos Out Loud, and you're listening to Bronx DNA. BX, stand up.
The South Bronx was burning down around us, and nobody seemed to know why.
Everything south of the Cross Bronx Expressway, they just let it burn, but nobody gave a damn.
And all of a sudden, neighborhoods just went whoosh, gone.
Nobody's aware of the fact that we got a city dump right here in backyard.
How could city government allow this to happen? Who was in charge? Why?
The story we were told, the story the whole world was told, was that the fires were somehow our fault.
But we didn't burn the Bronx.
We were the ones who saved it.
So, Vivian, thanks for coming on the program. It's so great to have you here. I know that we've known each other for quite a while, but it's always great when you roll in this space with someone and kind of get to know each other in a different way, right? It's not just having a conversation like when you're having a little house party or something, or just when we bump into each other. We're actually going to dig in here a little bit, and we're probably going to get to know a little bit about each other that we don't know already, which makes it even better.
Hi, Eddie. I'm so happy to be with you. Thank you for inviting me, first of all.
The thing that I want to do is sort of dig in a little bit into your origin story before we go into talking about the film proper. So you're an educator, a facilitator. You've worked a lot with youth and doing programming. You worked at the Coral Foundation Bronx Works. And then one of my favorite, New Settlement Community Campus, because it reminds me of a high-tech version of the Whole Avenue Boys Club where I grew up, where I got my start in photography and film. First, tell us about how it was that you got into doing all this work in the community.
So, as you know, I grew up in the South Bronx, right? Born in the old Lincoln Hospital, and I'm one of 5 children. You know, Lincoln Hospital was our healthcare provider. Whenever we got sick, we went into the emergency room. And at that time, it was because that was the only thing that was open, the pediatric emergency room. So I went to 62, went to 52. I think I learned a lot even in elementary school. By the time I was in 2nd grade, the teachers would have me sit with the new students that came from Puerto Rico or anywhere else, even like from Haiti, I remember.
Right.
Mentoring and tutoring students who lack English language. And so from there, you know, I was always sort of used to help out other students and volunteer for school events. My mother's a prolific creator. She crochets, she sews. And even back then in the assembly, the school assembly, she would always make the costumes. People respected her skills. So I think I learned from that, you know. Then I went to 52 and then went to Murray Bertram High School. At that time, most of my friends went to either Monroe or Morris. And I wanted something different, quite frankly. You know, my brother went to Monroe, and your friends who went to Morris. I'm like, I want something different. And actually, the guidance counselor knew of a new school that was opening. So Bertram became it. By the time I got to my 3rd year, there was an internship program available to high school students. And that internship program led me to the office of Assemblyman Armando Montano, who was the assemblyman of my district on Southern Boulevard between 149th Street and Avenue St. John. I began doing constituent work as an intern. You know, I was not even 16 years old doing constituent work, helping people with their housing issues, with their entitlement issues, with food stamps, calling his attention to problems that the people in the community were having. Despite everything that was happening around us, the burning and, you know, all the issues, he was there really focused on constituent affairs. And then during campaign season, I would work on the campaign. And I'll tell you that by the time I was 17, he relied on me a lot around the petition drives because I was really good at knocking on doors and getting people to sign petitions to get him on the ballot. So that started my community service work. I'm always doing community service, always helping the community. Went to SUNY Albany, became very active at SUNY Albany. to the point I almost didn't graduate because I would leave my dorm room at 8 in the morning to do political work, go to class, but go do political work, go to class, do political work, and never really got my work done. And then finally, the vice president of student affairs called me in and said, the most political thing you can do, Vivian, is graduate.
Sounds like a wise person.
Yeah, he was wise, and he set me straight. So I did graduate, and then I came back knowing that I wanted to work in the community. I had already been working in the community. During my summers, I would come back and do voter registration. And I worked for Jose Rivera one summer doing voter registration and campaign work. So I knew I wanted to come back to do work in the community. Then I went to graduate school at the new school. I had already been working for Coro Foundation, got a real sense of how policy works in the city and in the country.
You really got a good old-fashioned getting your hands into the dirt in order to help people, not just reading it in books. If it wasn't enough with all this stuff that you've taken on while you're graduating and doing this work, Coro and the Citizens Advice Bureau and everything else, decide that there's an issue that you lived through and you wanted to work on a documentary. What was the genesis and epiphany that led you down that path?
In the early 2000s, the New York City Department of Education entered into partnership with the Bill Gates Foundation to build small schools. So CAB received a grant to be one of the CVO partners because the arrangement there from Gates Foundation was that, okay, New York City, we're going to give you all this money to start up small schools, but we want CBO partnership involved with the DOE. And we're going to give the startup monies to the CBOs, to the nonprofits. And so we became one of those nonprofits, and we started a school by the name of the Community School for Social Justice. During that time, I had already been working with Julia Allen, who worked for me at CAB, and thought about putting together a curriculum for the high school students to learn about their Bronx history. Usually for freshmen of any sort, they come into a school and they get 1 week, 2 week orientations. Thought it would be a good idea to give them some orientation to Bronx history. The curriculum was not taught. It was considered too radical. In my view, I think that what was not accepted was that we expressed or promoted graffiti as something that was viable and something creative and good. And the powers that be said, no, graffiti was dirty. Why are you teaching that?
Vandalism.
Mention hip hop. Well, no, there's so many, curse languages, it's profane, blah, blah, blah. And so the curriculum was never taught. In the meantime, Julia, my partner, was like, wait, all these things happened to you? As we were creating the curriculum, and she just was a bit surprised. Oh, shoes at the door, fires every day, blah, blah. And so then she encouraged me to do some writing, to write a book. And I wasn't, I was doing some writing, but not really focused on that because I was an administrator for youth programming. And at that point, I was very busy. One day she called me and she said, we need to do a film on the Bronx. And so we met with Joe Hall from Ghetto Film School. And he asked us if we had a treatment. We didn't even know what that was. And so we continued to do research. And then eventually Julia introduced me to Gretchen, my film partner, who was the master behind the camera. And then she began to film me and in my community. One thing I did, I come from 52. And so I was a member of 52 People for Progress. So I invited these folks to my house, cooked arroz con pollo, and we just sat there in our dining room just talking about the good old days while Gretchen was like a fly on the wall filming. And we just began talking about like all the good times we had, the Sweet 16, how we used to go dancing the hustle, the softball leagues we used to create and who's with who and who's this and who's that. And it was just really wonderful. But then at some point, the conversation pivoted and it was like, damn, but those times were hard. Those times were rough. You remember that fire? You remember this fire? You remember we lost this person? You remember this person died of AIDS? You remember that person went to jail, and it took a turn. And so that's how we started. That was the origin. At that point, I didn't have any idea that I would share my personal story in the film. I was just going to narrate some kind of research that we found, but it ended up that as we were showing the film to people, they would tell me, even funders, who is this narrator? What's her skin in the game? Why does she care? And at that point, of course, that's when we began to reach out to you, because we knew that you had done some filming in the Bronx and that you were a filmmaker here. And I needed to find people who were already expert at this and knew how to do this work. And, we were just trying to figure out how to tell a story.
I think at that time, too, you were reaching out to a lot of organizations trying to compile images and source material. But I think you're quite right. I think early on, it was obvious that your point of view was very important. It was already there because you were the one telling the story. And that became very engaging because it needed that central thread. It probably would have been a different film without that, with the human element and your family behind it and the photos, because we can all relate to that. That was me and my mom and my sister in those days growing up, where it was kind of insular. You knew that it was happening far and wide, but you're still in here because those discussions we're having at home were different than in the street. And that comes off in the film like gangbusters. If you grew up in the time, you can relate, but anyone can relate to it because you basically can say this is a family unit that's being surrounded by these occurrences that are beyond our control. But there's a switch to it, right? In the film, it's not just about talking about the things that were happening around you that were out of your control. You went and did the deep research and you started finding out things that people had whispered for many years but had not said openly, right? It was this thing like, we're going to gloss over it because it's already in the past, and why stir it up at this point? Tell us about some of the things that you did find out that make the film so hard-hitting.
First of all, I just wanted to go back. One of the main, individuals who really got me to tell the story was Eddie Martinez, who's a filmmaker himself, because we were doing a research. We saw the building of Bruckner and how it damaged the Hunts Point community, and it really isolated my community and the Hunts Point community. We interviewed and read a book about the fire by Joe Flood. Essentially, he talks about how there was a real systemic decision to close firehouses knowing that the Bronx was burning, and that there were priority communities who were being given firehouses, and they were protected when there were no fires happening in those communities. And that New York City Fire Department, they already had a way of knowing how to contain fires within a certain area. They knew the protocols. They had a system for doing that, but they chose to only prioritize Manhattan. They didn't do that in the Bronx because they could have stopped the fires from spreading. The other thing was, for example, Mario Morolla, who was the district attorney of the Bronx, he ignored the fires. In fact, he's quoted as saying, "What fires?" at one point to a newspaper. And it wasn't until the churches in the Bronx really got on his case. South Bronx churches, Catholic Church, and the Pentecostal churches, they put pressure on him to pay attention to it. When he finally does, and he, appears before Congress to sound the alarm about what's going on, Congress is not interested. They're not doing anything about it. He goes to the FBI, and the FBI says, well, we don't have any jurisdiction. What can we do? So those things were very frustrating. And it's in the film. We look at redlining. He knew that our community was poor. I mean, you grew up with me. We used to watch the Brady Bunch. It's like, wait a minute. They live in such a nice house and in the suburbs, and we, it was.
All those shows, Happy Days, it was all sort of some happy Twilight Zone episode that we and Phantom. And, you talk about all of this sort of done on purpose, which is true. And the common theme from a lot of politicians and the people that were doing policy end of it created the metaphor like when a body is injured, where the blood goes from the extremities to the central core to protect itself. In essence, what the city did, they protected Manhattan. They said, the hell with the outer boroughs. And then made it worse because, like you said, they then started taking away the resources that could have prevented a lot of that. If you look at it that way, as one of the largest crime waves in U.S. history that's sort of been swept under the rug until your film comes out, because then you talk about these things very openly and you have the research. You have what we normally say is we have the receipts. Yeah, you have a drawer of receipts in terms of this film. And so it sort of turned the tide about both that it happened and the way that it happened, but it also helped to demystify the stigma that we grew up with, because I've heard clips from fire departments from those days where they actually call us animals, those animals. Like if we were doing it to ourselves, and sort of the film made us who lived through it very proud. There was an instance when my mother started becoming a little bit more active in the sense that she would go with me. And I remember one time going through the Boys Club to an event that Mid-Bronx Desperados was doing when Genevieve Brooks was still there, kind of talking about these issues. And I remember my mother getting teary-eyed because she felt like, oh my God, they've taken us for a sucker all these years. Like they were doing this. I didn't realize that. And she never really became a community activist, but she damn well told all her friends and sisters every chance she could that what was happening wasn't a mistake and that it was being done on purpose. So, you know, she got it into her little circle. So your film takes it further. You've hit the mark where you now know that the film is going to require your own intimate narration and your back end of your story. Was it a hard sell to the family to bring them into it? Did they see it as something that was intrusive, or did they get it right away? Just jump in and say, fine, you know, we're gonna do this. This is important.
I think at first it was a hard sell to me because I was so vulnerable. I grew up in the South Bronx, and when we would go through the research and talk about the research as a team, I would get angry, I would start cursing, and I would be like, ah. And then my team was like, oh, you know, we can't show you like this on camera, baby. And you have to figure out how to find your voice to talk about these things. So how did that impact your community? How did you feel? So it took me some practice because I come from a place where I'm used to talking with my hands on my hips. And I didn't want to seem vulnerable either. It took me a while. It took me a while to sort of come to the fact that I'm going to be in the film in such a strong way. My mother was fine. My mother, I said, Mommy, we're gonna, oh, okay. You know, she was really great with the crew and was willing and able every time. We interviewed my dad, but, you know, it didn't work out because he's so somber in his delivery. The archival footage that we got growing up, he was a little like, why do you want it? You know, why do you want it for your film? But we got that. My sisters, my brothers, everybody was good with it. I think I was the main person that was kind of afraid. And the reason why I was afraid, and we can talk about this more, but that's a lot of pressure to represent your family to the public, to the world. And so I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't saying anything that was wrong. I had to fact check with my sister and my mother a couple of times. There was a time in our lives where we didn't have heat and hot water for 3 years. I said it in a narration, and I said 3 months. And I got called right away because I was showing my sister the cuts. And she was like, no, it was 3 years. I'm like, okay, let me check with Mommy. Mommy said it 3 years. And I checked with my brother. He goes, no, we didn't have heat and hot water for 3 years. I said 3 months. Because, you know, I kind of like forgot it, and I couldn't believe 3 years.
And the truth was actually more impactful. 3 months, you can swim backwards without heat for 3 months, but 3 years starts becoming a real serious issue for everything you have to do in a household.
Yeah, I remember a wedding that we had, a friend's wedding, and so the girls all came to our house to get dressed. Everybody took baths with pots. And we were heating pots of water for a wedding that took hours.
And when I went to School of Visual Arts, the Boys Club gave me a voucher to take some classes there. And I remember this guy asked me, how did it feel to be poor in the South Bronx? And I was a little bit dumbfounded because I remember like, why? I don't get that. And I don't think we saw ourselves that way, right? We had fun. We had places to play. They weren't the best playgrounds and they weren't the best swings. And, you know, you would come home with brown hands from the rust on the chains of the seesaws or whatever. But we didn't see ourselves that way, right? Because we had food, we have a place to sleep, we had all our friends. I don't know about you, but I would leave in the summertime with my friends at 7 a.m, go to the local public school, get the lunches or the breakfasts that they would give us for free. The attendant would always give us extras because she knew we was going to be out all day. And we didn't come back till the evening. You know the rule. The rule was when the lights come on in the street, it's time to be home. And I remember many times I was playing tag and all of a sudden the lights come on and we're like, we got to go home. And it was like, we're big and bad. And all of a sudden, Mom said, you got to be home. So we lived through that. And your film shows it so well. But not just the pain and not just the reality of why it was happening. You show people turning things around, community organizations, people that said enough is enough. No one's going to come save us. Nobody's going to throw us the lifesaver. It wasn't coming. In fact, it was getting worse. you start looking at that and you start putting people in like Harry DiRienzo and others that did make an impactful difference, not just for the community that they were doing it in, but a lot of people took the role modelship and also did it in their neighborhoods. How was it discovering all that information? There's a moment in the film, and I remember it got to me too, because you're digging through all the paperwork and you come across some facts from the fire department. And in the moment, you kind of pause, you get teary-eyed because you're so frustrated. And I think it's almost like that moment my mother had when she realized that it was almost insurmountable, the amount of abuse that was being committed against the community. How was it finding out all those details?
You know, I had been a member of 52 People for Progress, so I knew that Al Quinones was always taking care of the park. He took over the park if it wasn't for him. You know, I had interned for Banana Kelly when I worked at Coro, so I knew about the work that Banana Kelly did, and I knew that they were, you know, instrumental in helping to redevelop the South Bronx. I mean, I had known about Genevieve Brooks, and so we reached out to people and tell us your story. We reached out to a lot of organizations and a lot of people because we wanted to flip that narrative, right? That it was the people of the South Bronx who burned it. It wasn't. It was the people of the South Bronx who saved the South Bronx. That scene where I'm upset, and let me tell you, I was upset a lot during the time of making this film, during the time that we were making the film. That scene just, it kind of like just hit me that they didn't care. They just did not care for a community that I came from and for a community that I loved. This is where I came from. And like you just mentioned, you just hit it. We had so much spirit, you know, and it was wonderful. We just had so much fun, Eddie. You talked about you having fun. On my block, we also had a great time. Even though things were hard, things were rough. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it, right? Life was hard, but there was this spirit in our community that was just like, you know, you can't describe it. I mean, it was just amazing. And that moment, it hit me. They just did not care for my community, and that's when, and I sort of carried that for a while, that sort of anger while we were doing the film. Like, okay, so we're doing a film about policy that was created to abandon and neglect us. Okay, but we need to also show the community spirit behind the work that was done to save the South Bronx.
You finally get the film done. You had sponsors, you had some funding, so there was some capacity there, but did the idea of a film based on that topic, did it resonate with people in terms of interest for putting it out there in terms of screenings?
Julia, who was my, partner in crime when we first started, she was a housing activist and she's an educational activist. So even before the film ended, she started reaching out to organizations across the country, asking them, like, are you interested in seeing a film like this? So she put together an impact campaign that had me traveling in many parts of the United States, including Puerto Rico. We did a 10-day tour in Puerto Rico showing the film to organizations. And what was interesting about that tour was that no matter where I went, first of all, there was always a Puerto Rican or an African American who knew someone from the South Bronx or lived in the Bronx, had a grandparent. It was amazing and people understood. But at the same time, just practically no matter where we went, audiences identified with government neglect. They identified with urban renewal. They identified with redlining. They identified with the racism that was taking place, the discrimination of their community. Even though fires were particular to the South Bronx, they got the rest of it. This sense that government wasn't working for their community and that it was the people in their community that are working hard and sacrificing to keep their communities from getting further destroyed. And I even went to Whitesburg, Kentucky, 97% white.
Appalachia.
And I didn't want to go. I was like, oh my God, where are you sending me? But we finally go. And the audience identified with the fact that the government had abandoned them. So it was different, fires were different. They even talked to us about how we cook our pork differently than you guys, whatever. The issue was government neglect.
You've done a lot of work with youth, obviously. How did the younger generation receive the film? It's a teachable moment for sure, because these young minds weren't around during the time. Are they getting the message?
Yeah, they are. I mean, I continue to do talks with kids from high school, middle school. Next week, I'm going to meet for the second time with a group of fifth graders. At first, I never thought fifth graders are not going to get this, but they do. So there's a lot of we didn't know this happened, or, with high school students and college students, oh, no wonder my parents talked about having this experience. I never understood them. Now I understand what they went through. Oh my God, this relates to gentrification now. How do we get involved? What are the groups out there that are doing the work to continue to keep the Bronx from burning again?
I don't know if you noticed, but I've been noticing in the last 2 or 3 years a lot of small fires to mostly mom and pop, low-rise businesses where you hear, there was a fire, and then when you really tune into the news, what you're seeing is 5, 6, 7 stores burnt down. And I'm like, that's almost impossible, because how big does the fire have to be for it to burn through 6 stores? And then nobody's really talking about that. Do you think that given those things, and I've seen it happen already about 4 or 5 times, do you think that what happened in the 70s and 80s could rear its head again in a different way?
Well, I've seen a couple of articles that are hinting at what you're just suggesting, and with the businesses and with also housing, like, oh, isn't this a coincidence that the fires are on the rise, first of all, and fires are on the rise, affecting businesses. And, we know that businesses collect insurance money. And there was even this one article, I don't want to misspeak, but maybe it was on City Limits, that discussed that there were fires in residential buildings that were owned by the same landlord. So we're like, what's that coincidence? And so, or fires where landlords are not adhering to code. So there is a concern. You saw that this winter, you're right. We saw that this winter there was an increase of fires.
Yeah. It seems to be going up a lot. Well, I think as a community, we have to sort of ring that bell and let's have that conversation and make sure our elected officials are aware of it too, not just sort of coming out when it happens and saying this is bad. But I think, it's good to see the sound bites at the moment or the day after, but I think we have to hold people accountable to make sure that it's on their radar. I think we've gotten a lot in this amount of time. I want to thank you for taking the time to come and share with us. I want to make sure that people go to the website, takeitupfire.com, and kick tires. There's a lot to see. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of resources that teach this to young people, but also request a film, get in contact with the filmmakers, make sure that it comes into your community. They have a curriculum, but also they have screening guide that walks you through the process of not only how to promote the film, but how to set it up and what equipment to have. And, there's good technical assistance built into the process so that you can make sure you have a successful screening and things to consider as topics. I'm really glad that you were able to put this together, that it's out there in the universe and continuing to move forward. And I wish you all the best going forward. I know you have another project emerging. Hopefully we'll hear about that in the near future. Once it's ready to go, we'll love to have you back again. All the best going forward. Thank you for being with us today.
Okay. Love you, Eddie.
Love you too.